launching a new radio show, new podcast recording studio facilities in Sheffield, and my thoughts on the Spotify acquisition of Gimlet and Anchor.
Welcome to the Richard Daly Podcast, bringing you a UK perspective on the latest news and developments from the world of podcasting and internet radio.
Welcome to episode 34. I'm your host, Richard Daly. Each week I curate and discuss the latest news in podcasting and internet radio with a focus on the smaller podcaster, radio host and DJ. Yes, I'm back with the podcast after a bit of a hiatus. I'm not going to dwell too much on the reasons for taking a break, but let's just say sometimes life gets in the way of things you'd really like to be doing. Why am I back now? Well, a couple of reasons really. Firstly, I think there is space for a podcast that covers the kind of news I like to discuss around internet and online radio and podcasting. Secondly, I'm in the early stages of planning a new radio show, so I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit about that process as the show develops. I've been off radio for a little while now. To be honest, I got a bit disillusioned with the show I was doing for an internet dance music station. Until now, I've mostly presented live or as live shows. I didn't really feel like I'd found my voice, as the saying goes. Over the last few weeks, I've been taking some radio coaching sessions with Niles Mahoney and Tracy Lee from onaircoach.net. Between them, they've encouraged me to explore different ways of presenting and hosting shows. Because of that, I'm now planning to try putting together a pre-recorded show with more production, still including some music, but with more talking as well. Perhaps it would be good to talk more about the coaching in future episodes if you're interested. For now, I'll just say if you are looking to improve your presenting skills, then I can really recommend working with Niles and Tracy. You can find them at onaircoach.net. I'll put the link in the show notes for this episode, and I should mention, I'm not getting paid to say this, I just feel that their coaching has been really helpful to me. So let's move on to the news. I can't ignore the biggest recent news, which of course is the purchase of Gimlet and Anchor by Spotify. So Gimlet is a well-known podcast producing agency that set out in their own words to be the HBO of audio. They've had some big hits, like Startup and Reply All, but I think it's fair to say they've also had a number of flops. Anchor, a podcast hosting company, has somewhat of a Marmite reputation in the industry, I think. Some people love their free service model for podcasters, while others have been concerned about some of the T's and C's they impose on their customers, and the sustainability of that free hosting model. Plenty has been written elsewhere about the acquisition, so all I want to comment on is that buying Gimlet gives Spotify a ready-made pool of podcast producer and host talent, but it also gives them the studio complex that Gimlet has built up from their previous rounds of funding. By all accounts, they have a lot of state-of-the-art equipment in their custom-built studios for producing audio, video and music in-house. Because of this, I expect to see a lot more original content coming out of Spotify in the next few months. This seems to be the model favoured now by so many media companies. Just look at Disney and Amazon, for instance. As for what Anchor brings to Spotify, like many other commentators, I'm not really sure. Surely it's not about the number of podcasts Anchor host, even though the Spotify press release hints at this, saying they're getting Anchor's established and rapidly growing creator base. Perhaps, as I'm suggesting with Gimlet, it's really about the infrastructure they're requiring. I'm not convinced though. Surely there were better podcast hosting companies that could have been purchased for the same amount of money. One final thought on Spotify. Let's hope that their push into podcasting will help the industry start to address the thorny problem of music in podcasts. After all, Spotify are paying music companies and artists to stream music. Is it really too much of a stretch to find a way to do this for podcasts and let podcasters play music legally? Let's move on. A number of podcast studios where you can rent recording space by the hour have been springing up in the last couple of years. If you're anywhere near Sheffield in the UK, then Rebel-based Media now has you covered. Their new fully soundproofed recording studio has space for up to 4 podcasters, plus it can also handle guests dialing in on Skype or by phone. They'll provide training if you need it on the equipment, which includes 4 Heil PR40 microphones and a Rodecaster Pro mixer. They can even provide a producer if you need one. Prices for the studio start at £55 per hour plus VAT, which seems pretty reasonable to me. If you'd like to see more of how the studio looks, take a look at their Instagram account, Rebel-based Media, or Mark Asquith's personal Instagram. He's their CEO and a co-founder of the company. I really hope we see more of this quality of studio popping up in different locations for podcasters and other broadcasters to use. Lastly today, an interesting development from RadioPublic. Before I go on, I should declare that I'm an investor in the company, though only a very, very small one. RadioPublic's aim is to help listeners discover, engage with and reward creators of podcasts and other audio. They have a free podcast app for iOS and Android. As well as the usual podcast listening features, they also have humans hand-picking selections and making listening suggestions. and they create trending lists of the most popular podcasts in different categories based on listening stats. Alan Taper of Pro Video Coalition asked RadioPublic a number of questions about their new service, which is called Podsites. If you have your own developed website covering everything you do, then this may not be of much interest. But for those that just want a simple website for their podcast, then this could be just what you're looking for. Podsites provides a dedicated website for podcasts that use an existing media host such as Libsyn. Maintenance of the website is automated, as a new page gets created when a new show is posted in the show's RSS feed. Of course, hosts like Libsyn and Stitcher give podcasters access to simple hosted web pages already. Podsites are suggesting, naturally, that theirs gives more functionality, something I'm sure the hosting companies will be looking to catch up with very quickly. I'll put a link in the show notes to the Pro Video Coalition article so you can take a look for yourself at some more of the proposed benefits of the new service. Okay, so that's all the news from the Richard Daly podcast for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, do share it with a friend on Apple Podcasts. You can now also find this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podsearch, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. If you visit my website at richarddaly.com, you'll find all of my social media links, as well as the various ways you can subscribe to the show. The show notes for this episode are at richarddaly.com/34. As usual, please send me your questions or comments, and if there is a topic you'd like me to cover, then you can tweet me. As always, I really do appreciate your feedback. Thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.